Hello and welcome to an Everyday Canines video. In this series we're looking at everything running contact, and there is a lot here to think about. So I want to start with a little bit of an intro to give you an idea of what we'll be doing and where we'll be going and what we'll be covering. Perhaps you've already done a bit of running contact work and you just want to improve upon it, or perhaps you're new to running contacts, you've never done them before, you've done stopped. You're now starting to think, well, should I do runnings instead? You're looking into it. Or perhaps you're completely new to agility and you're just coming into teaching your contacts and you've been told that running contacts is what you need. So you're looking at it from that perspective. So we want to look at this right from the ground up to understand everything that's going on with a running contact. And there is a lot to think about. So let's start by saying what is different between a stopped contact and a running contact. It sounds quite logical in the essence that a running contact, by the name, means the dog does not stop and carries on. And a stopped contact is when the dog comes down and it does stop. Sounds straightforward, but of course in all things there are slight variations. Let's talk about variations in stopped contacts. So the stopped contact you most commonly see, and which was what I would say the standard stopped contact for a long time, was where the dog came down and stopped with their front feet on the ground and their back feet on the dog walk. That's the one if you're people still doing stopped contacts, that's usually the one you see, and they'll do that on every piece of equipment, not just the dog walk, but the A-frame and the seesaw. The other version of a stopped contact is what they call a floating contact. So it is a stop, but it isn't quite the same. This is where you're starting to almost veer into a running contact. So in a floating contact, the dog comes down the dog walk and they go into a down here. So they don't stop on the contact, they come off but they go into a down. Effectively the idea is, because they're running to go into a down, the dog should automatically get this contact because they're thinking to themselves, I've got to go into a down here, so they're slowing for the down. So that's why it's called a floating contact, because they float over the contact, obviously getting at the same time, they don't actually stop on it. And then once they're on the ground in the down, the handler then releases them and they carry on. Another version of a stopped contact, which is almost a running contact, is where the dog comes down and they run off the contact, but they stop here, all 4 feet, say in a stand. So they come down and they do stop. So they're not actually stopping on the contact, but they're stopping just after. The idea again is, the dog has come down, they know they're slowing down to stop, so they will get that contact automatically because they know they're slowing down to stop. But you're starting to get to a stage where you're almost in a running contact position, because all it takes is a quick release of that dog and that dog is almost running through. Another version of a stopped contact, and it's usually done with small dogs, is where they stop with all 4 feet in the contact rather than just the back feet on. So this is known as a 2 on 2 off, because you've got 2 feet off, 2 feet on. But you can also have a 4 on, which is where all 4 feet are on the contact. So as you see, there's a lot of little grey areas with a stopped contact, and the grey areas with the stopped contact then feed into the running contact, because we've got a lot of little grey areas of running contacts. So running contact, a true running contact, means the dog powers over the whole obstacle, be it dog walk or the A-frame, and they go running through, and it is a pure run. Perhaps better to call it a gallop than a flat out powering run, because in a gallop with certain dogs, in a full out run with certain dogs, they will put feet together. Whereas in a running contact, we actually want it almost to be like a fast canter, because we want to see some spread. But we'll go into that in another video. However, not everybody can get that sort of running contact. I certainly couldn't when I started with my Merlin. So we do adapted running contacts. That could be where the dog comes down and they slow. They slow and they walk into this area and then carry on. That is a running contact technically, because the dog has kept moving, but they're slowing down, they're creeping into this area because they're not 100% sure of the criteria. So they're creeping down into it. And I think that's safe to say that a lot of people, certainly before we've now got lots of trainers teaching running contacts, that's where their running contacts were originally, because we couldn't get the speed to get them, you were getting leaping and things. So we would encourage a little bit of a creeping, and it all came through there. I mean, that's what you could see with my Merlin. And he would very often do a lovely contact where he would creep all the way down to here and then go by the way and jump. So there are variations upon that theme of the dog coming down, perhaps slowing as it comes here, then running. I mean, you could even have a stage where the dog slows into this area. It's not quite stopped, but as soon as it's in that area, it's watching the handle. The handle says go, and it carries on. So that's even stranger grey area. Is that stopped? Is that running? It's somewhere in the middle. So the basic premise is if the dog keeps going, it's a running. If they stop at any point, either on the contact or off it, it's a stopped. But as I say, there's lots of variations. Why would you choose a running contact over a stopped contact? In a competitive sense, the running contact will always pip a stopped contact. Basically, even if you've got a super fast dog, and don't get me wrong, there are competitive people out there with stopped contacts, but if you were in the higher levels, a stopped contact will simply be not as fast as a running. It never can be, because you think you've got to go down there, you've got to lose all your momentum to stop, and even if the handler tells the dog to go really quick from the stopped, they've still lost all that momentum and they've got to power up again. So if you're looking to get to a higher level, I mean, if you're thinking like levels like champ, you would not expect to see many dogs that have stopped contacts succeeding in champ, purely because you're at that top level. Everybody's doing running contacts and you're just going to have that element of lost speed. That being said, you will sometimes still see dogs with those stopped contacts doing really well if they're powerhouses. So it isn't going to be a clincher to say if I do stopped, I won't be able to get up there. It all depends on the dog, all depends on your stops, and also it depends on the general speed of the dog and how fast they are covering flats. The other factor between running and stopped is the training. So with a running contact, it does take a lot of training to get it good. And though I don't consider it vital, I do believe people can do running contacts without equipment. It helps enormously if you have regular access to a dog walk more than just once a week, or an AFM, something. Dog walk mainly. I found that the dog walk is the hardest to get the reliable contact on. A-frame is usually a lot easier, but the dog walk is the hard part. So in that regard, if you haven't got regular access to equipment or something similar to equipment, then the running contacts could be a lot harder for you to do. They can also be a lot harder to get the dog to understand the criteria. There can be a lot of grey areas with it, so it can be harder to get the consistency. Stops are generally considered a lot easier to teach, and certainly with beginners they're a lot easier to get the understanding because you can see what the dog is doing and you're having that moment at stopped. So it's easy to see what you're getting. I would argue, however, that without consistent training, you can see that the stopped contacts can very often be just as unreliable as a running contact, because if people start to allow their criteria to slip or a bit hazy with their criteria, then you start seeing missed stopped contacts or dogs coming off and going, oh, I should have had my foot there. And though it is generally slightly harder to teach the running contact, I would say to teach a very good stopped contact, you have to still be quite consistent, accurate, and you have to be able to get out there regularly training it. Another factor with stopped versus running. With a stopped contact, it means that you can catch up with your dog. So if you've got a super fast dog and you're way behind and you want to be where you need to be next to help them get around the next obstacle, being able to ask them to stop, it's effectively you're putting them in a wait. That means you can catch up, get to where you need to be and carry on. It's that little bit of a little bit of saving grace that you can get to where you need to be and handle whatever is next. It could be that there's a round the back on a jump next and you know you need to be there to handle it, so you need your dog to stop. When you've got running contacts, you don't have that luxury. Your dog has to be capable of doing anything that comes after the dog walk independently. No matter what it is, it has to be independent. Now, depending on the course, you may be able to get to here, and quite often I do, to look at what your dog is doing and help them in the next obstacle, but it's always possible you won't. So that's just something to bear in mind. If you're going to do running contacts, you need to be able to verbally tell your dog what to do next, and that includes turns and things like that, because otherwise your dog is just going to not know what it's doing, powering on. You get a situation where if you can't tell your dog what to do next, the dog will come off and it'll slow down and it'll bark at you, or it'll turn back to you, or it'll just do whatever it pleases. And so then you're not really gaining anything from the running contact. You might as well have a stop so you can get there. So there's all these little factors to bear in mind when choosing between a stopped and a running. Why do I have running contacts? Personally, I prefer them. I have always preferred them, even when I was first starting in agility and I didn't even know that's what they were called. I preferred them. Reason being is it means my dog is in flow. I have not so much Sparrow, but certainly Swift. She is only just into medium, so I need every inch of speed she can give me, and a running makes a lot of difference. The other factor is, and it is something to consider, is that if you've got a powerful dog coming into this stopped position, not so much the down, this stopped, and especially on the A-frame, think of the jarring force you're putting into that dog's shoulders and body and spine and neck as it's coming down. It's coming down as fast as it can, bam! That is a lot of impact. Now that's not the same if you encourage your dog to slow down before it hits the stopped contact. That's different. That if the dog is already slowing down, that's not a factor. But what a lot of people want, they want the dog to power into that stopped. Well, if they power into that stopped, you've got to think that's where they're putting the brakes on. And that repetitive strain on the shoulders, the neck, the spine could lead to issues and repetitive injuries and damage. And that's one of the major factors why I always chose not to have that sort of stopped contact. I did at one time have a floating contact for Sparrow. I felt that was not a good idea with my dogs. I felt that was going to be too much pressure on their neck and shoulders. That is just one of those little safety factors, and obviously it's up to you to choose that one and decide if that's a problem with your dog. So lots of things to think about, lots of things to consider. And in the next videos, I'm going to really go into the technical side of running contacts, because there's a lot going on with these contacts, a lot more than just the dog running down it. And we'll look into it, and if you want to do this, we're going to show you various ways of doing it, and you'll know how to make a really good running contact, how to train it and get there and get consistency. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, you might like to subscribe to Everyday Canines on YouTube, and you can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and I hope to see you all again very, very soon.